morning, everyone. I'm glad to see y'all here today. Today we're going to be in Numbers chapter 20. There's all kinds of sins out there, and they're all the same in God's eyes. But sometimes we forget that sin can cause us more pain later on in our lives than what we do now. We'll start off in verse 7. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water. And thou shalt bring forth them water out of the rock, so thou shalt give the congregation and the beast drink. And Moses took the rock from before the Lord, as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said unto them, Hear ye now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. And the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and the beast also. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, Because ye believe me not, to sanctify me with the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. So here we see that Moses can't bring the children of Israel to the promised land because of the sin he committed now. He smote the rock instead of speaking to it. This alone is a sin because he disobeyed God. But now, let's reread verse 12. It says that, And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, Because ye believe me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring the congregation in the land which I have given them. Because of the sin he committed now, he can't take the Lord's people into the congregation. Because of this sin, it's going to cause him more pain later on because of what he did now. Let's turn to 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1. This is talking about David whenever he goes into here we're supposed to be going into battle. And it came to pass, after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him, and all Israel, that they destroyed the children of Ammon, and besieged Rabbah, but David tarried still in Jerusalem. Before I go on, let's read the beginning of the verse again. And it came to pass, after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle. So this means that David wasn't really supposed to stay behind. He was supposed to go with his warriors into battle. But he didn't. As Christians, we know that if you're in the wrong place, it can ruin our testimony. Like if we're not at church whenever we're supposed to be, it can ruin our testimony because we're not there. So let's keep on reading on. You can see what this leads to. And it came to pass in the evening tide that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman. And one said, Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers and took her, and she came in unto him, and he lay with her, for she was purified from her uncleanness, and she returned unto her house. And the woman conceived, and sent and told David, and said, I am with child. Now David really shouldn't have been here to begin with, but then he sinned with this woman. So now we see that this woman, who he was never really supposed to see because he was supposed to be at war, he sinned because of it. Because he saw her, and he never really was supposed to be there. So because of him staying behind, it caused him to sin. But let's skip ahead now to verse 14. And it came to pass in the morning, when David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah, and he wrote in the letter, saying, Set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. And it came to pass, when Joab observed the city, he assigned Uriah unto a place where he knew the valiant men were. And the men of the city went out, and they fought with Joab. And there fell some of the people of the servants of David, and Uriah the Hittite died also. So now, David had killed a man in innocent blood, because he wanted the woman that he never would have saw if he would have just gone to war in the first place. See how this kind of snowballs? But the thing is, though, now the Lord starts calling him out, and he sends Nathan unto David to confront him in his sins. Let's turn over to 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 16. This is where David repents of his sins, and David therefore besought God for the child, and David fasted and went in, and lay all night unto the earth. And the elders of his house arose and went to him to raise him up from the earth, but he would not, neither did he eat bread with them. So this child now is going to have to pay for the sins that David did, because the child dies, which never really would have happened if he just would have went to war in the first place. But he was in a place he really wasn't supposed to be, and that caused him to sin, which led to more sin, and it just snowballed over. And now this child is going to have to pay for this. But as we know, the Lord will forgive us, even though we are so sinful, as we see in verse 24. And David confronted Bathsheba his wife, and went in unto her, and lay with her, and she bare a son, and he called his name Solomon, and the Lord loved him. The Lord does not get honor and glory from us sinning and sinning, but he does get honor and glory whenever we repent. As we know, Solomon went on to become the wisest king of Israel, because the Lord blessed him, and he loved him, as we see here. But by us repenting, we give God the honor and glory, not by sinning. And as long as we continue sinning, he doesn't get honor and glory from that. We must be careful, because if we don't watch our sins, they'll snowball and hurt us more. Brady, if you'll dismiss us into Sunday school.
Dear Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this time to be in your house today, dear Lord. Reese, dear Lord, and the truth that he was talking, dear Lord. It will just bless him, dear Lord, as he studies, dear Lord. Continues to do devotions, dear Lord. Dear Lord, just thank you again for allowing us to be here today, dear Lord. Thank you for allowing us to be in a country that we can worship you freely, dear Lord. And we thank you for Brother Thomas, dear Lord, that just bless him and his family, dear Lord, and bless him as he brings us a portion of your word today, dear Lord. Dear Lord, just go with us throughout the rest of this day. Help us to be your servants. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you here today. I pray you had a good week. We're going to start in Hebrews chapter 11 this morning. Said before, I don't typically like to title things, but I was studying a few weeks ago, and this just kind of jumped out at me. And when Tyler had said something earlier this week, this was kind of what I kept going back to. So, who in here has an opinion? Everyone has an opinion, right? But we're all opinionated. And I titled this lesson, making our minds up. And honestly, I was thinking on the way to church, I completely forgot that the kids were going to be in Sunday school for the most part, because I thought this would be good for them to hear too. But I feel like so many times in life, we have our minds made up before we realize it. Whether it's about a person that we see across the room, or maybe about a restaurant as we drive by, we form an opinion or we judge. Now, you can take that however deep you want to. But we have morals. We're sitting here today, and I think if we ask someone to describe us, they would say, well, they're opinionated. They have morals. They have character. They love the Lord. The world might call us closed-minded sometimes because we're unwilling to change and go the way that everything's going. If you want to hear someone else's opinion, all you got to do is turn on the TV, get on the internet. It's everywhere. But we stand for things. Most things in our life are already settled for us before we come to them, before God brings them our way. We think we have most things worked out a lot of the times. That's our thoughts. But what about really important things? Not the things that you've already thought about, but things that don't really come to mind until you're put into that conversation or that situation. And then there's a decision to be made. Is your mind made up for that? And I'm going to use Reese for an example this morning because this is a conversation that I've had with him several times, and I try to bring it up every now and then. The conversation usually goes something like this. It's important for you to now to decide that you're never going to do something. It's also important to decide that this is what you're going to do. I'll tell him it's still right to do right, no matter what the outcome is. It's going to be harder on you a lot of the times, but I forgot the songbook, but the first song we sang this morning, I tabbed it. It was talking about how you always have peace when you know when you're in God's will. And even if you're suffering because you made the right decision, just knowing that you made a godly decision brings you peace in the middle of everything. I got this wrote down. Young people that are in here today, and adults too, we can apply this to a lot of different things, but decide now that you're never going to know the taste of alcohol, that you're never going to know what it is to do drugs. Decide now that when you're put in an uncomfortable situation that you're going to follow the Lord and get out of it as fast as you can. Do not give in to what's going on around you. Decide now that you're going to wait till marriage. Make God the God of your life. Make His book your guide. Make His law your law. And we're sitting in here and I'm thinking, man, this has been great for young kids. But the fact is, we probably need to hear this about once a week, if not once a day ourselves. So Hebrews chapter 11 is where we're going to start this morning. We got 3 texts. It should be a fairly short lesson. Hebrews 11, let's start in verse 10. It says, "For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God." So speaking of Abraham here, Abraham left his home. He left his family. He left everything that was familiar to him, everything that was comfortable. I'd struggle with that because if I could be anywhere in my free time, I'd just soon be home. God called and Abraham went. And my response is, what faith is that? That is insane to me because he was so faithful, just willing to pack it up and go. And it reminds me of a missionary that's called to a foreign field, or maybe a pastor who's called away from his church family, or the place he's comfortable at to go and serve God somewhere else. I can't imagine that life. Abraham went not knowing what laid ahead. He just simply went. He just obeyed. So let's jump back up to verses 8 and 9 in the same chapter. It says, "By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise." Abraham went out not even knowing where he was going. God just said, "Hey, you got to get up and go." And he went. Verse 10 reminds us of why he was willing to go. He did not know exactly where he was going, but he did know what he was looking for. And I have this thought that came to me just now, but every time I read this of Abraham not knowing what he's looking for, so to speak, or where he's going, I mean, it's like shopping with your wife, isn't it, guys? Like you're going to go in one store and you're going to look at something and you're going to go to 10 more, but you're coming back to that store. She knows in her mind she's going to get it, but we have to go see it somewhere anyway. So Abraham was looking for a city that's built on a firm foundation, okay? I was reading through a devotion this week, and this was the example that was brought out. The city of Venice, Italy, is said to be sinking 1/4 inch each year. It's a floating city. It has a murky foundation. Abraham left Ur, and there was no, we see recorded in God's word, there was no problems when he left, but God told him to go. So, all right, God's telling us to do something. Just because things are going good in our life doesn't mean God doesn't have another plan at that time. He didn't always have to use a trial or a problem to get our attention, does he? Abraham had faith to see that any place or people that's not built on God, on his foundation, on God's teaching, on God's character, he doesn't need to be there. And we forget that. We'll go out places with the guys from work. We'll go eat. When we sit down, we feel convicted about being there, don't we? We know better than being there. Some so-called churches come and go. Church members tend to come and go, but when God is in them, when God's in it, it's real. It's going to stick. There's no getting away from it. You can run from it, but God's going to get you back. So Abraham traded the emotional, the physical stability of his hometown, of his family, for the spiritual and eternal foundation of God's will. He wanted, above all else, for his life to be built and shaped by God. Now think about that. He wanted God to shape his life. I'm a little too stubborn to let that happen sometimes. That's the decision to be made. Is it your life or is it God's life? Are you going to serve yourself or are you going to serve God? And so decide now, at the age that we're at a young age or at an old age, we have to decide that we're going to make godly decisions, that we're going to serve God. I truly believe that at a young age, using Reese for an example now, and I mean, I'll just stick it out there. If he decides now that he's never going to drink, I honestly believe that he will never drink if he makes that decision. And maybe I'm wrong because that's just how stubborn I am, that I wouldn't want to give in. But these decisions are important to make at a young age or at the older age. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 23. So the question this morning, while you're turning to 1 Samuel 23, is where is your faith? What is your faith in? What's your confidence resting in? Do we trust in familiar surroundings? Do we trust in our bank account? Does that bring us comfort? Does our retirement plan bring us comfort? Does our family and the security in our home bring us comfort? Or does God bring that comfort? It's easier to put a smile on your face when you got enough money in the bank to get by for a while, isn't it? But that's not where our faith should be. Are we looking to God and building our life on His Word, on His leading and His teaching? Nothing is more solid than God's promises. We know that He's going to keep them. No one can build a city or shape a life like God can. And if God didn't do it, it's like a fad. It's going to go away. It's going to come and go, but it's never going to stick. It's got to be of God. So I want to look at this example. This is something that we kind of studied a few weeks ago, but 1 Samuel 23, let's read the first two verses. It says, Then they told David, saying, Behold, the Philistines fought against Keilah, and they robbed the threshing floors. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go and smite the Philistines? And the Lord said unto David, Go and smite the Philistines, and save Keilah. So the Philistines are attacking, they're stealing food, and David wants to go and help out. He's saying, Is this something you want me to do, God? Before he ever makes the decision to go, he was such in tune with God, such a good leader, that he said, I need to find out if this is God's will. Even though it seems like an obvious situation and what's right's right, he still wants to see God's will. Let's read verses 3 and 4. It says, And David's men said unto him, Behold, we be afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we come to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? Then David inquired of the Lord yet again, and the Lord answered him and said, Arise and go to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into thine hand. Isn't it amazing that David is literally being hunted by Saul here, and he's taken time out of his life to go and help his fellow countrymen? That amazes me. But we read in verses 3 and 4 that David's men are scared, and they don't really seem to want to go and engage the Philistines. They don't want to put forth the effort to get there. And David, as their leader, hears what they have to say. And we see that he goes to God yet again. One more time, he goes before God over the same situation, same problem, same circumstance. He goes before God, and God says, yes, go down. David is, notice that he had to go to God. He went to God multiple times here before he got the peace or the comfort to go and carry out God's will. And I think it's important because we see that, sometimes we're not going to have that go-ahead peace about us or from his will. David, it took him more than one time to really see that he needed to do this. Verse 5, it says, So David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines and brought away their cattle and smote with a great slaughter. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. So David's men didn't want to go, but the beginning of verse 5 sums it up. So David went. So David and his men went. They're like, we don't really know if we want to go that far. We're tired. We don't know if we want to get engaged in battle. David says, all right, God, what do you want me to do? God says, go, I'll give you victory. David says, all right, pack it up. We're going. It didn't matter what they said. It mattered what God said. David, as a leader, had his mind made up to do God's will, even when those around him didn't want him to. So is our mind made up like that? Even when things are falling apart around us, even most of the time it's our own family that we have to persuade sometimes, isn't it? His mind was made up enough, though, that he said, God wants me to do this, we're going to do it. So can we honestly sit here this morning and say that we have this kind of faith, that even if everything else is running the other way, if everyone else is doing something different, that we're going to do it God's way? It's easy, just as the message was brought last Sunday, for us to sit here in America in our heated church with the freedoms that we have and serve God. Situations are going to arise, even here in America, in this blessed land, where we're going to have to make a decision to follow God, because everyone around us is going the other way. And this isn't a hoorah for Christians this morning, but it's the way the world's going. I believe persecutions are coming. I honestly believe, though, that David here would have took whoever. If there was one man willing to go to war, David had his mind made up enough to go to war, because God said, I'll give you the victory, go. The numbers didn't matter. Be turning to Joshua chapter 24. So far this morning, we've seen Abraham, who was willing to leave everything behind, to go and follow God. We just read about David, who was willing to stand against his own men if he had to, so he could be in God's will. The two examples we've looked at so far: do God's will even if you don't understand it or know how it's going to work out, just like Abraham did. David obeyed God's command even when it wasn't popular with those around him. The thing is, we read this and we're like, well, these guys were just super guys. They were just great godly men. But they had their mind made up they were going to follow God. It's easy for us to look at these men this morning and say, well, these were easy decisions for them, but it wasn't. It wasn't easy for them. It's not going to be easy for us. It's a struggle a lot of the time. But in Joshua chapter 24, let's look at verse 15. This is an extremely popular verse. It says, "And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Like I said, a popular verse. A lot of people have the end of this verse hanging in their home somewhere. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. The verse is deeper, though, than I think we see sometimes. Joshua is commanding here, choose now who you're going to serve. Make a decision. Life is full of them. Are you the Lord or are you yours? You know, Joshua was a leader. He was a warrior. That was one of the biggest differences between he and Moses. Moses wasn't a warrior. Joshua had seen the war. But as Joshua is sitting there and he's standing before the people and he's telling them to make a choice, he's saying, you going to serve God or are you going to serve others? By the way, I don't care what your answer is, my house is going to serve God. That's bold. That's brave. He takes it a step farther there at the end, and he says, "For me and my house, whether it's popular with you, before you even give your answer to me, I'm going to follow God. Whatever the outcome is, death or life, feast or famine, poor or rich, my house, me as their leader who will be judged for the decisions made in my home, what's allowed in my family, we're going to do it God's way." That's what he said. I'm going to be judged for my home. You know, every man in here, you're going to be judged for your home. We know that. For what's allowed in your home. I think a lot of the time, the biggest discouragement that we often face is from our own home at times. You know, it seems like we're more willing to go out and talk to a stranger about God than we are our own family at times. It's intimidating because we think we know them. And it's hard. But we're going to sit before God one day on our knees and we're going to answer for these things. And I'm not trying to get off track here this morning, but I think we need to, I'm not trying to get preachy. In our homes, I need to encourage my wife and she needs to encourage me. I'm going to be judged for it. I need that encouragement. You know, I need to know that I'm making this decision and you have my back. Because it's not really what I want. It's easier for me to go the other way. This is what God wants. Moms, you're going to be judged too. I'm not trying to make it about the man this morning. For the young kids that are in here this morning, you know, when your mom or dad tell you no, it's not because they want to see you unhappy. It's because they love you and they want you to make a godly decision. Remember that they love you and they want to bring you up in God's law and God's will, not in the world's. I think as husbands, we should lead our homes, our wives, our children with confidence and love, just as Christ loved the church. It's not about I'm the man, you listen to me. It's about I love you, and this is what God wants for us. A wife can set it straight. My wife tells me what I need to hear, and is brave enough to tell me what I don't want to hear. And this isn't in the word, and I'm just going to say it, but I believe the woman sets the mood of the home oftentimes. I can come in a bad mood, and if she's in a good mood, at least I got that going for me. I'm happy because she's in a good mood. But if she's in a bad mood, it kind of trickles down. Just saying, Steph. But seriously, it's about encouragement. It's not about anything else. It's about encouragement. And oftentimes, the biggest decisions we make are within our own homes. It's not decisions that we're making here as a church, because it starts with an individual and then the family and then the church. We have to be encouraging to one another. We can't discourage each other. I have a little joke kind of thing. We eat lunch together last week, Derek and Brian and myself, at this restaurant that Derek is just infatuated with. And he was telling us a story about a couple that had stolen a shark from an aquarium in Texas because they didn't think the shark was being treated right. So they put it in a baby stroller, rolled it out, took it home, and put it in their swimming pool. And my thing was this. I looked at Brian and I said, I don't need a wife like that where I have a dumb idea. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. You know? Like, I need the wife that's going to be like, that's a dumb idea. Okay? But you know, there's people that marry like that. You don't need that. You need someone that's going to hold you true, is the point. You don't need an encourager that's going to... We got off track. My point is, everyone has a responsibility in the home, even the kids. But we have to decide now that our thoughts, our actions, our reactions, they're going to be God's. They're not going to be ours. Okay? Let's read verse 14. It's the last verse. Same chapter here. It says, now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. I really love the first part of this verse. Therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We know that. And people think, how can you fear something and love it? Well, I feared my father plenty, but I loved him and I knew he loved me. That's how that works. I know he's strong enough to do something about it. Fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth. Serve God with a true heart, but it has to be real. That's what this verse is saying. You have to be real. You can't come to church. You can't go home and be a fake Christian. It has to be real. No fake, not a show. Our singing is God's. It's not ours. It's not about us. What are the reasons we do things? Is it for us or is it for God? Joshua was telling him here, he said, it's not going to stick if it's a lie. It's not going to be real. It won't trickle down to your family, to your children, to your grandchildren if you're a fake. They'll see through it. It has to be real. Make your mind up to serve God and be real about it. Sincerity, verse 14, it says, now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity. It means being free from pretense, deceit, or being a hypocrite, more or less. Meaning we're not one thing here in the midst of God's people and another thing when we leave. We're true. We're the same all the time. We go before God honest and humble with a true heart, and we should, because he knows our heart. We pray so many times and I don't really want to talk to God about that today. That's kind of our attitude. We may not say it. God knows our heart. We might as well be honest with him. Pretense, the word that was in the definition for sincerity, is an attempt to make something that is not the case appear true. Joshua was saying, if you're going to serve false gods, serve them. Don't come here and act like you're serving God and it not be real. He's saying you either get on board or get out. One way or the other. Don't drag it in here if it's not real. I don't want to see it. I don't want to be around it. So in closing this morning, if it's something big or small, no matter the age that we're at, we have to decide now that our life is God's life. It's not ours. The hardest thing that we face oftentimes is decisions and reactions. Because, as we said before, a lot of times we can't help what happens to us. The only thing we can help is how we react in that situation. But the decisions that we make when we're going through things at a young age or even at an older age, when we're dealing with children or grandchildren, I believe we can make our mind up now that we're going to do it God's way. And with God's help, we're going to stick to it. But we can't have our minds made up like we talked about in the introduction. We all have opinions and we see things and we tend to judge before we really know all the facts. And that's just part of our sin nature, I believe. And some are better at that than others. But we need to make our minds up that our homes, our church, the decisions in our homes are going to be godly decisions. because every day there's something that comes along that seems to test that more and more. So I know this isn't anything new. It wasn't. I just wanted to encourage you this morning. So let's go ahead and dismiss. Brother Tyler, would you dismiss?
Grace and Father, Lord, I thank you for this day that you've given us, Lord. Thank you for just how you bless us, Lord, in so many ways, Lord, in my life, Lord, you bless me more than I can comprehend, Lord. Lord, I just thank you for this time that we could be in your house, Lord, and Lord, for the devotion at Sunday school we've heard already, Lord. Lord, I just thank you for each one, Lord, and for each man's devotion and study, Lord. I just thank you so much for that, Lord. And may we take what we've heard into our hearts and to our lives, Lord, may we use it, Lord, to better serve you, Lord, Lord, to help witness to this lost and dying world. Lord, I do pray for the lost today, for those in our midst, Lord, those in our family, those who are our friends, Lord, and you save them, Lord, before it's eternally too late, Lord. May they come to know how great it is to be a servant of yours. Lord, may you use Murray Faith Baptist Church, Lord, and Murray, Lord, to help bring shine the light, Lord, to this small town, Lord, and may you use us to better witness for you. Lord, again, I just thank you for this day that you've given us, Lord, and for everyone who's here today, Lord. And Lord, I just pray for Brother Thomas, Lord, and thank you for bringing him and his wife to us, Lord, and be with him in the next hour, Lord, this evening, where they may ready to prepare our hearts and minds, Lord, to receive your word, Lord, and just be with him, Lord, and Lord, just give him the words to speak. Lord, think of those who are sick, Lord, on our prayer list. Lord, think of Brother Hall, Lord, pray for him and for his family, Lord, as they look in on him, Lord, Lord, just think of my family, Lord, and lost my path, Lord, just be with them, Lord, today, and strength. Lord, all those on our prayer list, we know each and every name, Lord. Lord, I just thank you for the building that you've given us, Lord, and Lord, for the progress that we've seen, Lord. I just thank you for that, Lord. I pray for this church, Lord, as we seek the pastor, that we may seek your will, Lord, and not seek on our own desires and who we like, Lord, and Lord, we just seek your will and move without rules. Lord, I thank you for this country that you've given us, Lord. Thank you for our freedoms, Lord. We don't have fear to come here and serve you, Lord. I just thank you for that, Lord. Or may we not take advantage of that, or may we take advantage of that, Lord, and not grow accustomed to it, Lord. May we take advantage of that freedom, Lord, and serve you, Lord, while we can do so freely, Lord. Lord, I just pray for the missionaries of foreign lands, Lord. Be with the one who lost his life this week, Lord, that you just be with them, be with his family, Lord. And Lord, I just pray for this church again, Lord. Just be with me, Lord. Forgive me for I pray. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.